Hi there, Acadia owners. Today in your 2019 GMC Acadia, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install Demco's Air Force One supplemental braking system. There's 5 main components you'll need when flat towing your vehicle behind your motorhome. You'll need your tow bar, which is the connection between your motorhome and your vehicle. You'll need your base plate, which is the connection point your tow bar is going to attach on your vehicle. You'll need your diode wiring, which is going to take all the lights on your motorhome and transfer them to the lights at the back of your vehicle. You'll need your safety cables, which is a supplemental connection in addition to your tow bar, as well as your braking system, which will apply the brakes in our vehicle when we hit the brakes in our motorhome. The Air Force One is a truly supplemental braking system that uses the air from your motorhome to activate the cylinder on your brake pedal. So this means the harder you press the pedal inside, the more air that's going to transfer back here, applying the pedal harder here in your vehicle, so it'll closely mimic that of a naturally driving vehicle. The operating unit takes the air pressure from the motorhome and properly distributes it to the cylinder attached to the brake pedal. It also has wiring on it for a breakaway switch, so in the event of a catastrophic disconnect, the unit will take the stored air that's in here and apply the brake pedal to help your vehicle come to a safe stop. The cylinder here on the pedal, when air pressure is applied to it, it will apply our brake pedal. We'll go ahead and hit the brakes in our motorhome and you'll be able to see it operate here. So you can see here when I hit the brake in the motorhome, it's going to apply the pedal in the vehicle. In addition to the pedal moving, there's a reed switch that's attached to the cylinder on the pedal, which will illuminate an LED on the back side of the rear view mirror in the vehicle. You can use your motorhome's rear camera to monitor this light so you can ensure that when you're going down the road, your braking system is working properly and applying the pedal. We'll begin our installation by mounting all of the major components. The biggest one is going to be your operating unit, which we're going to place underneath the hood here. And we're able to mount this just using a couple of self-tapping screws in the holes right into the cross beam at the top in front here, just in front of the engine. Self-tapping screws are available here at Etrailer.com because you will need some extras, as it does not come with those to mount this. We'll also need to mount the male air fitting on our vehicle, which is where we'll make our connection between our vehicle and our motorhome. We mounted this just to the bottom of our electrical connector using the bracket that came included with the electrical connector. We just lined up the holes on the bracket with the hole on here, and we did have to drill out an additional hole for the other bolt there. Next to that, down below, you'll see our breakaway switch. We'll also want to mount this. This mounts directly to the base plate mounting point that comes with a Roadmaster base plate. If you've got a different base plate, you may need to find a different mounting location for it. I do recommend getting this mounted before you put your fascia back on, because you're going to have to remove the fascia to put the base plate on, so it's a great time to get this mounted up. We're now inside where we need to mount the operating cylinder onto our brake pedal, and this just simply clamps around the brake pedal using the included bracket that's already pre-installed on the cylinder here. Just loosen the screws, slide the metal bracket over the brake pedal, and then just tighten it back down on it. When tightening these, I just use a socket and then just tighten them by hand, because the metal does bend, and we want it to bend just a little bit to clamp on there, but we don't want to over tighten it and break anything. It'll get plenty tight just by doing it by hand. We also need to mount the cable anchor. This is the location of the Firewall where it's going to pull to apply the brake pedal. And we mounted this by cutting out a small section of the carpet right behind the carpet there. And you'll get a black bracket included with your kit that has 3 holes in it. We use 2 self-tapping screws to mount the bracket, and the third hole we had stick out over here in this empty space because we're trying to line up our anchor as best as possible with our cylinder. So by sticking that hole off to the side, we're able to use a nut and bolt to mount the anchor to that hole, which positions it closer to behind the pedal. I did have to bend the bracket at about a 45 between the first and second hole because of the way the body forms here. So you will have to kind of bend it a little bit to make it properly line up against the Firewall metal. We just attached it using self-tapping screws. These do come in your kit, so you'll have everything you need there. This extra bolt that we used over here does not come in your kit, but you typically get some extra hardware for mounting your components. So you'll likely have a bolt and nut in there that you'll be able to use, but if not, you can get some at your local hardware store. And the last major component we'll need to mount on our vehicle is the LED indicator, which we'll position on the back of our rear view mirror. It just sticks on there using double-sided tape. You'll notice that there is a sensor here, so you want to make sure when you're putting it on you don't cover that sensor up. The wiring then can just be poked right up into the headliner, and we just poked it in, working our way down to the side. Once we got all the way over to our pillar, we just poked it in the seam between the headliner and our pillar here until we get to the headliner here. From here we just ran it down the weather stripping, and this does just pull off. If you just give it a little bit of a tug, you'll see that it just does pull off there, and that way you can easily run that wire down behind it and then just poke it back in place once you're done. We ran it all the way down until we reached this seam here, where we poked the wire in the seam and then ran it down the side here, and we just kind of left our wiring there. We'll make our connections. With all the major components mounted up, now we need to start connecting everything together. You'll notice on the operating unit that you have a vacuum, air in, and air out. We're going to be using all three of these. The exhaust here, we don't need to do anything with it. You just want to make sure it's not blocked, and we know it's not blocked here. We have plenty of room. And there's also two wires that come out the side. They're both black wires. So we'll start with the wiring. These two wires, it doesn't matter which one goes where. One of them just needs to hook to ground. So we ran it over to a stud right here. We crimped a ring terminal on it and then just positioned it behind the stud for our ground. The other wire needs to hook to your breakaway switch. This will hook to the black wire coming from the breakaway switch. So the switch that we had mounted down below at the front, we routed the wiring up to here and then just made a connection using a heat shrink butt connector. This will keep out any moisture, ensuring a long-lasting connection. You do get butt connectors with your kit, but I highly recommend upgrading to heat shrink butt connectors for any connectors that are outside the vehicle. The other wire coming off of our breakaway switch is the orange wire here, and this needs to connect to power. So you can see we ran it here towards our battery. Now you'll also notice a brown wire connected here. This brown wire we routed inside the vehicle because our LED indicator is going to need power as well. And we're going to get power directly from the battery positive here through our fuse harness. So you can see we heat shrink butt connected our breakaway switch orange wire to that fuse harness, and again we added that brown for inside. The other end of our fuse harness we just attached to our battery. We can get a better look here. If you press in on the release tab here and here, this whole cover will flip up, and we attached it here to this stud using a 13mm socket to remove the nut, sliding our ring terminal on, and then tightening it back down. You do need to crimp the ring terminal onto your fuse harness. We chose to put it here so that way we're not going to interfere with the loosening and tightening mechanism for our battery positive cable. I did have to make a small modification to the cover right there where we just trimmed off this little excess in order for our wire to clear there and not get pinched. We'll wait to install the fuse in our harness here until the very end because we don't want to accidentally cause any shorts while we're working. Here back at the unit now we can start making our airline connections. We're going to start with the air in. The air in is just a 1/4 inch airline which comes in your kit. You'll poke one end in right into here and it just pokes right in. It's a quick connect. So all you got to do is just push it in. I like to kind of push it in and give it a little tug and push a couple of times just to make sure that it's fully seated. From there we just attached it to the connector here at the front. We routed right behind the fascia, and again this is easiest done when your fascia's off when you install your base plate, so you can already get that routed over to here, and it just pokes right into the quick connect fitting here on the bottom. You will need to cut your hose to length, and I recommend using hose cutters which are available here at Etrailer.com to ensure you get a nice clean square cut. If you were to just use side cutters or wire cutters, you will likely not have a very square cut. It will deform the hose and it will likely leak inside your quick connect. Next we'll route our air out line. It pokes into the unit just like our air in, and from here we need to route it inside to our cylinder mounted on the brake pedal. To get there we routed it towards the driver's side here, just following factory wiring, zip tying it along the way. We go down the side of the battery, underneath our coolant bottle, and there's a grommet located behind the coolant bottle You can see here, this is our hose as well as our brown wire, and we routed it inside through this grommet. I just used a drill and a drill bit and just drilled a hole in the grommet because it is a very wide grommet, and our wiring's off towards the driver's side, so we can come off just a little bit to the passenger side of that wiring and drill that hole. It was easier to drill the hole on the inside of the vehicle by looking up. We'll head inside now so you can see where the wire passes through. Here on the inside you can see where it passed through, and it's fairly easy to access this, so that's why I drilled from the inside out. You'll want to just make sure you stay off towards the passenger side, and from there the hose just runs down and connects to the quick connect on our cylinder. It swivels so you can get the best position that works for you. While we're down here now, we'll go ahead and connect our brown wire, make that connection. This connects to our LED light that we routed down. Our wiring's just poked in right here. Your LED has a red and a black wire coming off of it. And we also need to connect it to the reed switch. The reed switch is located here on the cylinder. You simply just slide it in, and then there's one little set screw that you tighten down to ensure that it's in. If we pull on our pedal here, we see that the light turns on because we've already got it wired up here. So this wiring runs over, and it has 3 wires coming out of it. You have a brown, a black, and a blue. The connections we need to make is attaching the red wire from our LED to the black wire from the reed switch. We'll then take the black wire from our LED, and that will need to attach to the blue wire from the reed switch, as well as to a ground wire. So you'll see a black wire coming off the back here, also with our small black wire from the LED. This just runs to a stud right over here on the firewall where we put a ring terminal on it to get that ground. The last connection we'll need to make down here is our brown wire, which we'll just connect to the brown wire that we ran from the battery. That's our power circuit. Once we've got all those connections made, you can just tuck the wiring behind the paneling there. The last connection we need to make here is our vacuum line to our operating unit, and that's going to tap into the vacuum brake booster's vacuum line. That runs right here, and if you follow the line down, you'll see that it will eventually lead to the vacuum booster here. So we just made a cut about right here. We did have to cut a section of this line out to make room for our components. So I'd say we cut out probably 3 or 4 inches of the factory hose. And then we used the hose that comes in our kit here and the T-fittings to make some connections, but you are going to need some additional hose. Since this vacuum line is so thick, the hose that comes in your kit is not going to be thick enough to slide over it. You do get adapters in your kit which will allow it to work with the hose that it comes with, and this fatter end here is the same size as our factory line. So we used 1/2-inch hose from the large side of the adapter here, and the other side slid onto the hose, and we secured it with the included hose clamp. So you can see our large 1/2-inch hose there attached with the hose clamp. This is our adapter that you see here is inside, and it reduces it to the smaller hose that comes in our kit. We'll need to place a check valve in place here on the engine side. This goes towards our engine, and the black side of our check valve needs to face towards the engine. The white side then connects to another small piece of hose and then connects to the T that comes in our kit. This T here, you can see the hose coming out of the top of the T, which goes to our operating unit, and then the other side of our T here just connects back to the factory hose. On that side, we had to use an adapter again to step it up to the larger hose and then secure it with a hose clamp again over there. This is the hose that comes in our kit, and we routed it down over towards the operating unit here, but you will notice there is another check valve here, and we want the black side facing towards the operating unit. We've got all the connections made on our vehicle side now, so you can go ahead and insert the fuse, and this is where you can test some things out. Now, without any air, your unit's not going to really apply the pedal. Sometimes it has just a little bit in it, enough to make it move a little bit, but in most cases when you pull your breakaway pin, you're not going to see any pedal movement or anything happen. But what you will notice, if you place your hand on the operating unit, you'll feel clicking on the inside because it's trying to apply air pressure to the cylinder. It's just we don't have any air yet because we're hooked up to the motorhome. So if you pull your breakaway switch pin and it doesn't move because we don't have that air pressure yet, you can test out your lighting section by just coming down here to the cylinder and just giving it a little pull. Because we want to have just a tiny bit of slack there when we're setting this up and tightening down the set screw here for our cable. So that way we know we're not going to bind up the brake pedal. You'll see the light up on the reed switch as well as on the back side of the mirror if everything's working properly. So over on our motorhome side, we got a couple of components we need to mount. Now this is going to vary depending on the motorhome that you have. We mounted it inside of our rear compartment where our batteries are here. This will keep it safe from the elements inside here, but we still can access outside the vehicle easily in this compartment. You can see the engine's right back there, so we can easily get our hoses routed in and out of this location. We mounted it using 2 self-tapping screws, and I did put some fender washers on it to increase the surface area to ensure that it stays tightly mounted up there. You do get nuts and bolts included with your kit, so if you've got just a flat piece of metal, this is a square tube here, so we weren't able to drill straight through, you can mount it using the included nuts and bolts if you've got the appropriate surface. There are 3 connections that need to be made here. The connection here at the back on this elbow is going to run to the back of the vehicle for our female air connection. So we'll head back there, it just routes down and then over towards the middle. You can see our female connection here. We mounted ours just below our 7-pole connector using a couple self-tapping screws. And here's that air hose coming from the tank that just goes into the quick connect fitting. It's quick connect also on the other side, so everything's nice and easy. You just push those together. The other 2 connections we need to make from our tank here, this is going to be our metered air connection over here next to the one that we put towards the back. And coming into the front of the tank here, you can see it's got an arrow on it too showing this is in. This is going to be the supply air hose. So these are going to come from our brake relay valve. That's going to typically be located near your rear axle. So we're going to head underneath now so we can show you where we made that connection. It's going to likely vary from motorhome to motorhome, but you should see some similarities to maybe help you figure out the correct hoses. We'll also cover how to test the hoses so you can ensure you're going to safely find the right one and make the correct connection. So here we are underneath our motorhome now. It is a tandem axle motorhome. So we're between the 2 axles, and this is where our brake relay valve is located. We hooked our T's, which just have quick connect fittings, into the supply line as well as the metered air line, and then routed those hoses towards our tank. Now, if you're unsure which is your metered and your supply lines, the easiest way to determine which one is which is to just disconnect them and see what happens. Before you disconnect them though, you need to drain all the air out of your system, and typically the easiest way to do that is to just pump your brake pedal over and over, and the air is going to exhaust each time you pump it. The vehicle needs to be off when doing this, or else your compressor is going to run and just fill it back up. So after you've got all that air emptied out, you can come back here and just disconnect the hoses. You would do one at a time. So the largest hose is typically your supply. The quick connects here, you just press in on the collar. I like to use a wrench that's a similar size to the hose, and use that wrench and just fork over it, push in, and then you can pull this hose out. Once you pull it out, you'll need to see what happens when you start the vehicle. So you can get a friend to start it, then you can come under here. If it's your supply air hose, you're going to get air out of it basically right away, because once the vehicle starts, the compressor is going to run and air is going to be trying to fill this. If you're testing your metered air, which is typically a smaller hose like here, which is about a 3/8 size, that's the most common size for that. The testing procedure for that's going to be similar. You drain the system first, you can disconnect the hose, have somebody start the vehicle, but this hose should not have any air coming out of it when the vehicle is just running. Then you can have your assistant, while inside the vehicle with it running, have them press the brake pedal after they've built up some air pressure. And if the air comes out of the hose while they're depressing the pedal only, you found your metered air. You want to check these hoses one at a time, so make sure before moving on from testing your supply to the metered, you plug the supply hose back in, and vice versa depending on which one you start with first. Now that you've got all those identified, these you'll want to cut using hose cutters just like we did on the inside to make sure we get a nice square cut for our quick connect T fittings, and then route those back and make our connections at the tank there. And that completes our installation of Demco's Air Force One supplemental braking system on our 2019 GMC Acadia.